This video is brought to you in partnership with the Toronto Waterfront BIA. If you live in Toronto, or work in Toronto, or have traveled through Toronto, you'll know that the city has been growing at a frantic pace for years, often through entirely new neighborhoods that pop up where very little was once there, whether that be the Canary District, Liberty Village, or even Humber Bay Shores, which by some measures is Canada's densest neighborhood. And Humber Bay Shores still doesn't have a compelling transit connection to the downtown core. It's hopefully getting one with Park Lawn GO station, but it's going to be years too late. Many residents will have bought cars and will be used to driving for a lot of their basic trips. Because while the neighborhood does lack a compelling transit link, it of course has a direct link to the highway. And the reality is that, like it or not, if you have a car and live in a place where a lot of people have cars, if you're going to get your groceries, you're probably going to take your car and not walk or cycle. What might actually surprise you though is that we're building another neighborhood of similar, if not greater significance than Humber Bay Shores. And this time it's right on the doorstep of downtown. There is an incredible amount of development going on along the eastern waterfront, and soon there will also be in the Portlands, which we got to check out last year. And within all of this is a greater mix of commercial and office uses than we've seen with a lot of other new neighborhoods. Fortunately, there actually is a plan for higher order transit in the area. It's the Waterfront East LRT. This would create a new tram-style service from Union Station down to the waterfront and then east along Queens Quay, serving the new waterfront developments and terminating in the Portlands to also serve that development. This would look similar to some of the existing streetcar routes that already operate into Union Station but then travel west on Queens Quay. Now, traveling east, there would be new north and south connections, which would mean that not only would there be new services into the Portlands and serving the eastern waterfront, but existing streetcar routes like the 504A King could also be extended into the new neighborhoods. It's all really obvious. Connect a booming new neighborhood with massive central business district with a fairly low cost and effective and high quality transit service. Now, if this sounds like a good idea to you, and you want to make sure we don't replicate the mistakes of the past, there are actually consultations coming up in the next few months, and this is a great opportunity for you to help make some real change in Toronto, and perhaps to make comments and suggestions based on things you've seen on channels like mine, as well as on other urbanist YouTube channels to help make this project even better. If you take nothing else from this video, go to the consultations and make your voice heard. Now, I've talked a lot before about how we're spending billions of dollars of public money to open up and flood protect the Portlands. And for what it's worth, currently the planned density there is probably only going to increase, as housing advocates are pushing for more density, and Toronto's Mayor John Tory has even said that they're going to be reviewing the plans for the Portlands and the amount of density that's going to be going there. And that kind of makes sense. The Portlands should be super dense, and if they weren't, that would be a policy failure. There is room to build surprisingly tall, despite the flight path for Billy Bishop Airport being overhead, and we are spending billions of public dollars to open up new land for development, and in a place where there aren't that many neighbors to complain, and we're facing a massive housing affordability crisis, which additional housing can certainly help with, and a lot of the land in the Portlands is going to be parks anyways, and so more intense development of the land that's going to be used for housing and commercial space makes sense, because so much of the land won't be developed. On top of that, currently the plans for East Harbour as well as the eastern waterfront's various developments are already set to be way more dense than the Portlands. And scratch that, the density is already appearing. So upping the density in the Portlands wouldn't be making it stand out, but rather just being in line with its neighbors. In fact, according to studies run by the Waterfront BIA, the area adjacent to the Portlands is set to be home to over 50,000 residents in the next couple of decades. That's significantly more than even Humber Bay Shores, and that's before we talk about any significant new density, which could push population numbers close to 100,000 people, and that's not a typo. The nice thing about all of this and the Waterfront East streetcar route is that it just generally benefits from higher densities than you see to the west, at least in terms of development directly adjacent to the route. And that's in part because unlike on the western side, where the south side of Queens Quay is largely parks and plazas, on the eastern side, there will be development on both the south and north side of Queens Quay. The eastern route also benefits from the major commercial hub of East Harbour, which will sort of act as an anchor and counterweight for the eastern end, sort of like Exhibition Place does on the western end of the current harbourfront route. At the same time, a new route to the east would allow for a number of really useful network connections, including up to the aforementioned King Street route, but also east to the Leslie Barnes maintenance facility that currently is the main facility for maintaining the low-floor streetcars, and thus having a redundant connection to it would be great for making that part of the transit network more resilient. But right now, we're cruising for a bruising. For years, Liberty Village and Humber Bayshores have gotten away with not having a higher order transit connection besides the original streetcar routes that they were both built along. But no such luxury exists for the eastern waterfront or the Portlands, where there isn't an existing streetcar route that's good enough for the next couple decades. At the same time, given the proximity of these neighborhoods to downtown, as well as the affordability crisis we're facing, and the environmental crisis we're facing, not building higher order transit to the new dense neighborhoods we're building just would boggle the mind. Especially because all levels of government have been investing in this area. They're going to see less of a return if they don't build higher order transit. Amazingly too, in the case of the Portlands, we've basically done everything right from a planning perspective to create the conditions necessary for a higher order transit connection. There's dedicated space along the streets and even dedicated bridges specifically for rail transit. And unlike the other neighborhoods I keep referencing, all that's needed for the Portlands and Eastern Waterfront to have a direct connection to Canada's main transit hub that would be a convenient short streetcar ride away is a few kilometers of track. Having such a connection would make it possible for people to go from Union Station to the Portlands easily and quickly, and that would mean people from not just Toronto or the greater Toronto region, but Canada and frankly the entire world could easily get to the Portlands, thanks to the Up Express and intercity rail services. But for right now, it's not happening. And that's a big deal, because right now the waterfront has some of the nicest public spaces in Toronto, a city which is frankly short on high quality public spaces. Now, it's great that we're building those great public spaces on the waterfront, but if people can't actually get to them, it's not super equitable, and people from parts of the city that haven't seen that level of investment won't even be able to enjoy those new amenities. Speaking personally, I don't go to the Waterfront East all that often, and that's because there isn't a convenient streetcar connection. While it's easy to get to the Waterfront West on the Bathurst or Spadina or Harbourfront streetcars, the same just isn't true with the Eastern Waterfront and Portlands. Now, of course, there are currently bus services on the eastern part of the waterfront and through the Portlands, but they leave a lot to be desired, and they're not even as nice as some of the suburban BRT services we have in the Toronto region, much less the rail services seen on the western waterfront. And for what it's worth, the pedestrian and cycling connections are also kind of lacking at the moment. Of course, though, the poor transit doesn't just impact my Sunday afternoon recreational decisions. Poor transit means these neighborhoods, which are supposed to reflect our values in 2023, less equitable, less environmentally friendly, and less affordable. And when people can't easily get there, they're not going to go there and spend money at local businesses or set up shop in a new office. It's bad for basically everyone on every front. And this isn't just me musing that riding a tram would be nice when I could just hop on the bus today. Looking at the densities and the length of trips being made on the eastern waterfront, it's pretty clear that an LRT line would be well suited to serve those demands. Quickly, comfortably, and mostly unencumbered by cars. Not only would it mean connecting to other transit projects we're building, like the Ontario Line and improved GO regional rail services, but it would also likely make transit a lot more people's first choice for getting around, and this is backed up by international exemplars. In Helsinki, for example, the new seaside development of Jätkäsaari has a number of different tram services. And the same is true in Amsterdam's famous waterfront development, Viborg. And these weren't 20 years later additions that were built after the housing and development had already gone in, but fundamental pieces of setting up the land so it could be developed and people could move in and use the transit immediately. Now, given the undoubtedly compelling case I've made here, why aren't we just moving ahead and building this project? Well, it seems like it's possible that the price tag, sitting around $2 billion, might have given decision makers cold feet. But it shouldn't be. Toronto is already spending an enormous amount of money on transit projects all over the city and greater region. The Finch West LRT is $2 billion, and the Eglinton LRT as well as the Ontario Line are both around $10 billion. And the Eglinton West and Scarborough subway extensions are both around $5 billion. And that's not even to mention the investments going on in Mississauga and Kitchener-Waterloo, Hamilton, and Ottawa. Most of these transit projects, while great, aren't going to be going through areas that are remotely as dense as the eastern waterfront, and where transit use is already kind of ingrained in people's minds and the culture of the place. I think the cost, compared to other projects, as well as the relatively short length of the Waterfront LRT having such a big impact, is all the more reason we should build it. Now you might be asking, why, if the project is so short, is it so expensive? And I'm glad you asked. Currently, plans for the project aren't entirely about serving the eastern waterfront and the Portlands. A lot of the money is meant to go into upgrading the current underground streetcar terminal at Union Station, as well as at Queens Quay Station on the Bay Street streetcar tunnel that connects Queens Quay with Union. All of this means that a lot of the project cost is for expensive works that don't manage to actually extend streetcar service 1 inch. Now, no doubt, Torontonians like the underground streetcar connections, but they just don't feel super necessary in this case. In both Helsinki and Amsterdam, trams from these seaside developments approach the central station above ground and stop just outside of it. And something similar could probably be done in Toronto. Of course, this doesn't preclude a future connection into the underground streetcar tunnel, if we eventually deem it's necessary. Rather, it simply prevents the lack of a connection to the underground streetcar terminal, derailing the whole project because of high project costs. At the same time, with expanded transit options like the Ontario Line and GO train service, as well as new pedestrian and cycling connections, it might turn out that we don't actually need the additional capacity on the Union Station streetcar loop anyways. Basically, we probably shouldn't spend money on something we don't absolutely need before trying other options, especially if it means building less transit or building transit later. And while an underground streetcar link would be nice to have, there are a lot of things that people would like to have. And I actually think there are a lot of things which would probably be more noticeable to pedestrians, cyclists, passengers on the route, and locals than the underground streetcar connection that would cost a lot less money. And we could push for the types of changes with this route that would make it elevated from the streetcar routes of old. For one, as with the Eglinton and Finch LRTs, stops on the route should be more than just a nicer bus stop, with next vehicle screens, Presto card machines, and perhaps even off-board fare payment. There should also clearly be level boarding so that streetcars can be accessible for all Torontonians without having to deploy a ramp. And so that people can easily roll bikes and scooters on and off the vehicle, or strollers if families are coming down to enjoy the waterfront. There should also obviously be green track, because everyone loves green track. At the end of the day, Toronto is building a lot of great transit projects, but what it's not building is this great and frankly very obvious transit project. And so now it's time to make the case to decision makers. Attend the consultations, call or email your city councillor or MPP, and hopefully we can get even more transit built. Thanks for watching.